I think I'm live, am I? Anyways, how's things, witches? I started off the last day, I was talking about druidism, and it kind of you kind of need to have a basic, well, a very basic grasp anyway, of how the kind of societal structure was whenever St. Patrick came to the country. Obviously, there was a lot of raiding and robbing and stuff going on in the country, and there was, like that's how St. Patrick got here in the first place. But it's kind of funny. I was just thinking it's easier to tell a story from the beginning, and then it's kind of easier to understand things if you work backwards. So it's kind of, yourself. It is what it is. So yeah, just I suppose I'll start off after the druid situation. There was this thing. There was an English guy called Morgan, but his name whenever he became a priest was Pelagius, and Pelagius started this thing, a heresy, as the church defined it. Was just give me a 5x5 if you can there. I'm not sure if I got the sound right, but Pelagius was an English guy, and he's actually an Irish friend as well. But he started a heresy that led to a big divide in the Roman Church. It was basically over the original sin, that everyone's thanks Solitiums or whatever the name is. We were, well, I say we, the Roman Church. There was a battle over could anyone just live a decent life, basically, and basically be a saint kind of thing, or do you have to actively kind of go out of your way in order to be like a perfect human, And the Pelagian heresy was basically that you could just do nothing and you'd be doing perfectly good, like. Whereas the Roman Church said, no, you actually have to act. You have to physically work at being a good person. It was a big, complicated thing. Augustine went on about it, but that was the reason that Rome sent a fella here, because Pelagius, obviously, as an Englishman, he was living in Germany, I think, at the time, whenever he started this, or southern Germany, somewhere around that continent, Europe. But obviously, they wanted to send Roman bishops around everywhere, basically, to try and stamp this out. And the Pope sent a guy called Palladius, and you've heard of him, like he was the bishop that came here before St. Patrick, and he wasn't well received. He landed in Wicklow, if I remember correctly. Wicklow, and he managed to start kind of 4 small little churches, and he left some like relics and a couple of Bibles and stuff like that. But he basically got told to move on, like that he wasn't particularly welcome. But a few years after this, there was obviously there was a young fella. He was the son of a deacon and the grandson of a priest living in, kind of depends. You could say he lived in Wales, or you could say he lived in Scotland. I'd lean towards Scotland from what I've been reading in the last while. People like to say St. Patrick was Welsh, but there's kind of a bit of conflicting information on that. I suppose I'll just read out the start of his confession. This is what St. Patrick said about himself. He go at the very beginning, first paragraph in his confessions. I, Patrick, a sinner, the rudest and least of all the faithful, and most contemptible to very many, had Calpurnius a deacon for my father, son of Potitus the presbyter, who dwelt in the village of Banum Tiberniae, as he had a small farm close to the place I was taken captive. I was then almost 16 years of age. I did not know the true God, and I was taken to captivity in Ireland with many thousand men, as we deserved, because we were living far from God and did not observe his commandments, and were disobedient to our priests who admonished us with regard to our salvation. That's the start of St. Patrick's confessions, which was basically like him sitting down, writing, reasoning with himself, like why did you basically sitting down, kind of thinking, why did you come to Ireland in the first place, But whenever he was growing up, he was known as the name Succat. He's apparently, anyway, this is what it said about him. His name was Succat. Whenever he was taken as a prisoner to Ireland, he was called Croagh or something. How do you pronounce this? Corthoraighhe. Like, but it's basically like someone pointed out to me that it's kind of like Padraig. Well, the old form of it, the original form of it, but that the Irish used to use a C sound instead of a P sound. You know, you got this whatever the C Celts and the P Celts, like Wales. Whenever he was training as a monk after he left Ireland, he took on the name Magonius, and that was given to him by the bishop he was training under. And then on his ordination, then he took the name Patrick. So that's how the name Patrick came around from Succat. So yeah, he took the name basically that he was given as a slave as his ordination name. But he was probably born around Dumbarton, where that is today. It's just between Dumbarton and Glasgow. It seems to be the most likely place that he would have come from. But it was Melku was the slave owner that bought him, you know, and it was in around the time that St. Patrick was taken. The Roman Empire obviously was in kind of dire straits. Like, you know, there was constant skirmishes over the border from the Scots and the Picts living in the northern reaches of the empire. And as a nice wee tidbit of history, like as the Roman Empire was collapsing, the Irish and the Picts and the Saxons and one of the other, I think like the Northumbrians or whatever, they made an alliance together and they started attacking the Romans, driving them back. Like that was what kind of helped the collapse in the country of the Romans. But it was actually an Irish king that ruled over Britain for 10 years after the Roman Empire pulled out, called Crimthan, or Crimhan, whatever you want to call him, until the guy called General Theodosius took over the country again. And there was that Pelagius fella, the heretic, his friend was Celestius, and he was the Irish guy. And I've seen a nice quote about him. Saint Jerome, who kind of, you know, laid out the Bible the modern way, you know, with, you know, like verses and chapters and all. He called him an alpine cur raised on Scottish porridge. Like, I thought that was, someone pointed out then that porridge was like a symbol for the mixture of kind of agriculture and civilization or whatever, you know, the oat. But yeah, so basically, whenever you had St. Patrick coming to Ireland, you had obviously the Brehon law, or whatever you want to call it, the ancient laws, were the main bit of sway in this country. Like, and Roman law was collapsing like nobody's business over on the other side. And under Brehon law, priests could get married. It was actually, if you were an unmarried druid or bishop, whatever, you actually had less rights than a married one, you know. So it was geared towards like priests having families and stuff like that, which is the same as St. Patrick. Like, his father was a deacon, his grandfather was a priest, you know. But the language that Patrick grew up speaking was a kind of a variation. Like, British back then was a variation on Irish, you know. It was very similar. There's not a whole pile of it surviving. I don't know. I've glanced over a few things, but I've only ever seen a few scraps of it. I've never actually looked into it too much. Like, but it was basically learning a different dialect that he did whenever he was living in, whenever he was on whatever it was, Slamish Mountain or wherever it was he was being held captive. But anyways, Patrick, he said he used to pray 100 times a day and 100 times at night when he was in slavery, because he realized like that it was his own fault, like, for not, you know, kind of going with the logos, sort of, you want to call it these days. Like, you know, he was very kind of repentant, you know. He used to pray constantly. But one day he heard this voice. Like, he used to hear them now and again, but he heard this voice. Hang on, Captain Teeling. 2 seconds, folks. I can't. I'm terrible at multitasking. I can't read and talk at the same time. I'll get back to that. I'll probably go over a load of stuff tonight, like, but I just want to kind of hammer through Patrick, because I was reading up on it now this last couple of days, like, just to get the ins and outs of it. So I was like, I better just rattle it all off anyway, at least. But Patrick, anyway, he used to get these voices or visions or whatever. He got one day, and he was telling him, he was like, "Why am I here?" or whatever. He was praying, and he heard this voice. He goes, "Look, your boat is ready." And he travelled 200 mile around the coast of Ireland, and he found a boat. But the boat driver, he was a pagan, so he had to kind of do a quick prayer. God granted the the passage out of Ireland, like, and this is where it gets a bit confusing for a while, for a period in Patrick's life, and it's nearly as interesting as anything else that happens. Like, but it's very difficult to understand because ancient historians, a lot of Patrick's history was written down 100 or 200 years after he had died, and there's a lot of people that said, "Oh, he went back to his home straight away." There's other people that said, "Oh, he went to France, to train as a monk straight away." So it gets interesting because there's no record of Patrick ever being ordained a bishop in Rome, and that's like a lot of what you'd hear if you listen to a good few people. Like, they'll all say like Patrick was sent by the Pope, but sorry, I have a lump in my throat. But like a lot of that stuff about Patrick being sent by Rome, that appeared in like the 700s. And in the 700s, you had people basically trying to promote that the Celtic Church, like Britain and Ireland, were very, very closely entwined with the Roman Church, but they weren't in the beginning. Like, there was a hell of a lot of stuff that the like, even, the tonsure, like, the way monks shave their head and stuff. There used to be massive rows between Irish monks on the continent and Roman monks on the continent, like about one of them, like the Irish tonsure it was developed from the Druidic tonsure. It used to be called the Devil's Fence, but nobody actually knows. There was no record of what it actually looked like. Some people think it was just that you left the fringe of your hair, and other people are saying it's a triangle instead of like your, like the whole top of the head being made bald, like the Romans used to do. But like Patrick as well, like his writing, like as it's recorded, or transcribed by other monks, like, and they were swearing that it was exactly as he wrote it. Like, it wasn't in particularly good Latin, like, or the grammar was kind of a bit all over the place, and different things. John Paul Williams says, "Don't you know we'll be told he came from Africa if they get the chance." You're right. There's something I'm not going to say because they probably fucking ended up using it. Like, but yeah, I could definitely see that happening. Patrick was a black man. He's actually, I find this interesting. This is a bit of a side note now to the history, but there's a thing. It's kind of a West African religion, and Saint Patrick was like obviously a big driver in early missionary work. That obviously like a lot of Irish would have went over preaching the faith or whatever, but they, like the native pagans, they kind of took St. Patrick as this kind of snake god. And whenever there was a lot of whatever slave trade or whatever heading to the Caribbean, this here kind of Christianized paganism is more pagan than anything. Like, it just kind of takes names and stuff and saints off Christianity and puts them in this pagan thing. But it's called Santeria. It's a religion that they have over there, and it'd be very like kind of like like the way yoga is, like people thinking, oh yeah, it's all like the secrets of the the Far East, all this kind of crack, like, but it's the same in like LA. Like, you get these Santeria dojos. Like, I was actually listening to, what do you call that guy, Joey Diaz. He was on Joe Rogan talking about it one time, like, but it's a load of head cases, like. But it's an interesting side note. Like, St. Patrick, he's gone to Africa and then America, and he's been all over the place, different religions and everything. But anyways, well, St. Patrick, as far as I can tell, he was in Auxerre studying under Martin of Tours, who was his relative anyway. They say it was his uncle, but some relative of his, Martin of Tours, and he went there. He sailed up. He landed at the River Vartry in Wicklow, which was the same place that Palladius landed, and he got told, oh Jesus, would you just, we've a guy who was just here, like, and we told him to leave. Will you leave as well? He was like, oh Jesus, right. So he sailed up the east coast and he landed at a place called Saul near Downpatrick. And Saul kind of means like a barn, but it also means like an inverse church, because usually churches are built from east to west or whatever. That's the layout. Like the Latin Mass used to be, the priest with your back had his back to you, and he prayed to the east wall of the church, or the rising sun, basically. But whenever he landed there was a guy called Dipu, and Dipu, funny name, like, but Dipu, he thought Patrick was like, he had a couple of fellas with him, and they thought that he was a raider. So this fella Dipu and his family, like, all grabbed swords and spears and crap and started legging it towards the boat, like. And Patrick explained, he was like, no, I'm not here to rob you. I'm here to tell you about our Lord Christ, our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, like. And Dick Boo, he converted on the spot with his entire family. And he said to Patrick said, he was like, is there anywhere I can use as a kind of a base around here, like, a wee bit of land that I can, just use as a church or whatever. And he was like, yeah, no bother, like. And he gave him a wee patch of ground. That's where the name Saul comes out of today, like, and it was called Saul Patrick, like, because it was the inverse church. Because the Dickboo fella, he was like, oh, well, he was still pagan, like, so he said, can you build it north to south? But obviously, like, Saul means a barn as well, like, so it could have just been like a barn that he had at the time, and he said, oh, you can use that as a church, like. But anyways, from there, Patrick went back towards where he was enslaved near Slamish, and the guy that kidnapped, or that owned him as a slave, Milku, his son and grandson both converted, and they wound up becoming bishops. There's a place called Mahi Island on Strangford, and the grandson, he became the bishop of that area, and the son, he became the bishop of Granard, the first bishop of Granard. And there was another fella then, like the uncles of these guys. He became the bishop of Dunamore. It's like near Newry, kind of out around that. There's a lot of places St. Patrick founded called Dunamore, like, the big Sunday, basically. Like, there's one in Tyrone. There's, nearly everybody knows somewhere called Dunamore, like. But the son of the King of Ulster, like, which was kind of East Ulster at that stage, his son was Donart, and Donart converted over. Patrick converted him. And Donart started 2 chapels. And the name of the mountain where he started these 2 chapels at the time was called Ben Borca. And Ben Borca before that was called Slieve Slania. And today it's called Slieve Donard. There was a church and a monastery built at the top, and a church and a smaller monastery built down at the bottom. And that's like, you can still see the remnants of that today, like, if you go climbing up the Mourne Mountains. But he converted around that area for a long time. I'm just going to read the chat here for a second, because I'm taking a bit of tea at the same time. It's nice to get a wee bit of the LGBT. What's this? The LGBT tried to say he was on board with gays. That's how they. No, Jesus Christ, I don't know about that at all. Like, there's no mention of anything you wrote about that. I could guess what he'd say about that, but there was basically, like, his early following. Whenever he landed, he got a great reception, and he had this kind of tactic that he would go up to the leaders of the area, because he knew, like, as a foreigner in Ireland, that it was dangerous for him to just be wandering around the place. So he used to go up to, like, the local chieftains or the local local king. Tea, whiskey, says Chopper. If only I have to go. I'm going climbing tomorrow, so I thought I better not, like, but hopefully I get back early enough tomorrow night I can make up for the bit. But if only the pubs are open, I'd be delighted. But like, basically from Downpatrick, Strangford Lough, Dundrum Or down by the foot of the Mourns, like Newton Ards, all these kind of fucking all these places, like they were all nearly heavily Christianized at that stage. Like that was where he first got things going. Like and that's why you see a lot, like a tradition started, that he used to start his churches in kind of defensible positions along coastlines and on top of mountains and cliffs and stuff like that. Was because it was like you were open to attack. Basically, like only a few people had been converted at this stage. Like you can hear about people talking about someone mentioned this to me, but I can't find any reference to it. Like, but there used to be like three ages. There was the gold Christians, the silver Christians, and the bronze Christians. And the gold Christians were the Christians that were here before St. Patrick got here, because there was a few, like by all accounts, like there was at least a handful of Christians before St. Patrick got here. And of course, you've legends in Cornwall saying that Joseph of Arimathea fled there after the crucifixion. John Egan, Dan Brown obviously then used that as a kind of a basis that, the Ark of the Covenant is in, fucking some hill in Scotland or whatever. Sorry there. But after Patrick, after he had kind of got this corner of the country kind of sorted out, this little bay, he was like, right, I'm going to have to get a bit more protection around the country. So what he done was, him and 8 of his companions, they built these little kind of like wicker boats, covered them in skins, currachs or coracles, I think is the name of them. They're kind of like, they'd be like a traditional fishing boat kind of thing over in Britain. So they went down along the east coast and they got to the Boyne River. I see this now. Caroline Ryan says there was supposed to be pockets of Christianity in Ireland before St. Patrick at Sire near Burr in County Offaly. Yeah, like there was I think like they miss, like, what is that song? There's like a song British nationalists sing. Did those feet walk on England green or whatever, or whatever it is, that Jesus basically like became a monk at Glastonbury and all this kind of crack. And I whatever about the details, like, but there seems to be some truth in it, like, because it's funny, like St. Patrick, he found it so easy to kind of teach the Irish about Christianity, so we're very accepting to it. But I suppose it's a case of you'll never be a prophet in your own land, as they say. But St. Patrick, he landed at the Boyne River and he started walking up the river, him and there's 9 of them all together. And they got up as far as the Bruna Boyne, the Newgrange, like, and he went in for a while and, took a look around and was like, oh, sure, we'll see what the crack is here. But he went up then to the Hill of Slane. I said the Hill of Shnock the other day, but the Hill of Slane is where he lit the fire, and that the Druids and King Leary and all these boys saw this fire. And anyways, they sent down someone and said, come, you have to go up now, like, you're being told to go up to that place. And that's whenever Patrick, he sang a couple of songs on his way up this hill anyway. One of them was some trust in chariots, some trust in horses, but we remember the Lord our God was one chant that he made. And this is also whenever he made up this famous lyric, the breastplate of St. Patrick. I arise today through the invocation of the Trinity, that one. Very famous when you hear it sung at Mass all the time. But that's where this legend then comes. There's a legend about that breastplate of St. Patrick is also called the Deer's Cry, and the reason it's called the Deer's Cry is because it apparently transformed St. Patrick into a deer that he could travel towards Tara without being attacked. This was never his charioteer. Oran got killed by the brother of King Leary. But and he was then, they were debating Patrick. This is whenever he went up and was like telling people, like, I want this sorted now, like, you're after killing one of my men. And they debated, he debated with the Druids and all this and had an argument with them, and they were losing this argument. They couldn't beat his reasoning, like, and a couple of them converted, a few of them anyway, and he had Dove talk. You heard in the last stream I done, like, he was, I follow Patrick since my baptism. And the King Leary, he actually converted at that stage too, but he wasn't really like a very kind of a pious kind of boy, He was a bit of an arse, like, by all. Like, he was maybe, right, I suppose I may as well say it now, that during the time that Patrick started converting all these people, as I said in the last stream, that he brought peace to the island. And Leary, though, like, usually the High King of Ireland was constantly making military maneuvers, like, putting people along, say, like, if, along the border of Leinster, to try and intimidate them into behaving properly. And there was only one interprovincial war, basically, in Ireland in the time of St. Patrick, and that was between Leinster and Munster. And that goes back to, like, the name Brian Boru, like, of the tribute. Well, that tribute had been in place for 200 years, I think, at that stage, that Leinster was still being made to, give basically what we call them indentured servants to Munster. And there was a war going on about that. And that was basically one of the only large-scale military actions in the country whenever, Patrick was doing his work. He was calming down all the time, like, he was mending bridges between people. But it was after he was at the Hill of Tara, and a couple of them converted. Leary, on his, nominal conversion, said to Patrick, right, you're allowed to travel around the country, and unimpeded, like, you won't be attacked by any of the Gael. So that was great, like, because that was the tactic of Patrick, was to go up to the king and ask him, is it okay if I go around here, that kind of way, because he knew how it worked. And it was from the Hill of Tara he went to Teltown, and there used to be a thing called the Teltown Games, which was like the Olympic Games in Ireland, like, but it used to have poetry and everything, horse riding and wrestling and boxing and fairs and all this kind of crack at it. Actually tried to revive it at the beginning of the state in the 1920s, but De Valera cancelled it during World War II or something. And that was the end of that chapter. It'd be nice to reinstate it. But anyways, he went round and he started converting people, including a guy called Conall Gulbin. And Conall was from Tyrconnell, like, he was a Donegal prince, just there north of the Erne. And he was a brother of Leary's. And he was actually, I think he was he the father or grandfather of St. Columba, one of the other patron saints of Ireland. But after Teltown, he travelled through, like, Trim. He was given land in Trim by the king there, and that's when the town was founded of Trim, like, started as a monastery. Patrick went into Connacht then for 7 years, it said, like, and he started converting all the princes in the area, and people said that he converted personally 12,000 people. And he met the daughters of King Leary, called Etna and Fidelma, and they were training in Croagh, which is where Queen Maeve, from the Táin, that was her palace, but the Druids used to use that as a training place. And he met them at a well one day and converted them to Christianity. And they became like nuns. But as I said, like, nuns and priests and monks and stuff back then, it was only, they could all get married back then. Like, it was only in about the year 1000 that the church changed. The Roman church said that priests weren't allowed to get married, and nuns, had to live separate to men and all this kind of crack, like. But yeah, like, as I said, there was no actual proof that Patrick was a Roman bishop at all. Like, that he just kind of picked it up in Og's Air, like, oh, turning up late, you're grand, hey, just seen your stream going up tomorrow, deadly. Yeah, I haven't claimed Croagh Patrick since it was, must be 10 or 12 years ago, like, going up tomorrow now. Mainly because they told me I couldn't, just a bit awkward like that, like. But yeah, there was the Croagh Patrick thing. You see, like, the Croagh Patrick story about Patrick is it's kind of a half paganized thing. Like, it's like before Patrick came, climbing mountains used to be like a major thing. Like, obviously it remained a major thing, but a lot of them cairns and all that on top of hills, it was people used to walk up and leave a stone on top of the cairn. And like the story of Croagh, I was on about him in the Druidic times. Like Croagh, he was also called Crom Dove or Crom Do, whatever you want to call him, and he was like a pagan idol king. There was like like the bull worship in. I don't want to get too far into the Middle Eastern stuff, but in the Bible, like the golden calf and all this kind of crack. Well, there used to be a tradition in Ireland that whenever they were picking a king, they used to eat the raw flesh and drink the blood of a bull calf. And that there's a thing on Greek Sunday, like it used to be a tradition to slaughter an animal, a bull on that day, like, and share it out. And that was like that's a holdover from an old pagan tradition, like. And St. Patrick, the legend is that he went up the side of the mountain for 40 days. He basically done his Lent up on top of this mountain, like, and he was plagued by demons. It's like Jesus in the desert kind of stuff. But that's whenever he expelled all the snakes and Croagh and all the crows that were like, representative of demons, that he drove them all out of the country. Like, how's Brian Burry? I was just talking about you a minute ago there. But he was from whenever he was done, whenever he was in Connacht, he went up along the River Moy and he went to Killala. And Killala is interesting enough, like, because it was in his vision that he had whenever he was after he escaped captivity. He did go back to England for a short while, like, and his parents asked him to stay, but he had this dream. The guy called Victor appeared to him in his dream and handed him a letter, and the letter was called The Voice of the Irish, and he could hear people in Killala crying, saying, "Please, holy youth, come walk among us." And that was his like sign that he went, or that was his sign that he should, go back and preach the faith to the Irish. But after he got to Killala, he walked up along the coast and he went in through Drumcliff and into Bundoran. And in Bundoran, he set up, well, just outside of it there, near the Drouse, he set up a place called Desert Patrick. Like, it was like a monastery. That's where the Annals of the Four Masters was written. And from there, then he walked across the River Erne. And whenever he crossed the Erne, he was in the kingdom of Conall Gulban, who he'd already converted. And there's a place in Ballyshannon, it's called St. Patrick's Well. They're just at the out at the old Abbey Mill, like Catsby Cave. People used to say mass there in the penal times. It's a lovely place. But he went from there anyway on up into Inishowen, and he converted. He went to the Green and Iloch, which was the seat of the O'Neills, and he converted the O'Neill clan there, the leaders, and he marched up to Inishowen then, and he started, converting and starting a few chapels and all. He crossed over the Foyle, and he outside Derry, he started setting up a couple of chapels and all that kind of crack. That area, I think it's called I forget the name of the place now, but it's just south of Derry. He set up like 2 chapels out there. But he crossed back into Tyrone again into Tyrconnell, like into Inishowen, not for another month or 2, whatever it was. And he set up more churches there. And he kind of thought, right, I have this place kind of fairly well down. Like, so he started heading towards Coleraine, up along the north coast. And he went into Antrim then. It's like that, what do you call that? There's a train running along it today. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world, like, along that north coast. Like, but he went along there anyway. And then he went down through the banks of Lough Neagh, or along the banks of Lough Neagh, and he went back into Tyrone. And then he started the bishop, like the See of Clogher. He started that himself and appointed himself the first bishop of Clogher, which is kind of pretty cool, like, but in my opinion. But at this stage, like, he'd only brought, he had like 8 followers with him. And they were, like, obviously tired, like, very tired with the amount of work that they were doing. And he was like, he was kind of at a loss, like, because, I suppose it was St. Patrick. He probably had an idea of this the whole time, but he figured that it was too hard for him personally to be trying to translate the Bible to everyone, because it was in Latin, obviously. Like, he used a Bible that was older. It was like it's called the Old Latin Bible. It's before the Standardized Bible. He quoted that numerous times, like, before, was written differently basically than what you get today in places like bits and bobs of it anyway. But it was before Saint Jerome, so he was using an old type of Bible. So he went up to a king, and the king's name was Darajarg, and he was the son of the King of Ulster, one of the sons of the King of Ulster. But he ruled around Navan Fort up there, and he asked them. He was like, "Can I build a school and a monastery here, like so that people can learn Latin, and that way then I'll be able to spread, like the Bible better, Christianity better throughout the country. Like if I have a constant stream of educated Latin speaking monks and priests and bishops and all." And Darajarg, at first he said no, and he gave Patrick like a little kind of a wee tiny bit of ground to build like a cloister, like one of them beehive cells. And they had a church, like a small church there already, and there was a graveyard fenced off on it. But Darajarg's horse broke in one night and ate the grass in the graveyard and fell down dead, and he took that as a sign that I better just do what he says, like, and gave him enough land. And that's how Armagh, which was the seat of the Irish church for how long, hundreds and hundreds of years, like that's how it began, like. And at this point, whenever work had begun on building Armagh, Patrick, he went back to England for a while, and he gathered up 30 other educated, like, real clued in kind of boys, and said, "Look, I need more bishops in Ireland. Will some of you come?" They went back with him anyway. He stopped on the way, and he appointed a bishop in Isle of Man, and he went back over to Armagh, put a few fellas in there teaching Latin, training up more monks, all this kind of crack. And Patrick then, after he took a short rest, he started heading down towards Munster, because he hadn't been there yet. So he'd gone from, like, say, up the Boyne Valley into Connacht, then all over Ulster, set up like everything basically north of the Galway to Dublin line. So anyways, he was walking down anyway to Munster, and he thought he'd go down the east coast. So he walked down through Dublin, converted the King of Dublin, and he went around then for a year in Leinster. And it was like Leeks, Ossory, and High Kinsella were like the three kind of main kind of kingdoms. But the king of High Kinsella at the time, he was fully on board with this. Like he started himself, like that king in the time of Patrick, and just after, like, he founded 70 churches himself, like. But he went down then towards Cashel, and you see at this point, even though Patrick had, even though he hadn't been to Munster, the people that he had been converting were obviously going out around the country now at this stage. And there was 4 of them in particular, and I'm trying to remember their names, but I'm not fucking great with names. But 4 of them had gone down and started converting people, and that was grand anyway. But he went to the King of Cashel, and Cashel obviously, like, is a very important part of Christian history in the country. But he met the King of Cashel in the Golden Vale. Lovely bit of land down there, but he managed to convert the king. I think the king's name was what was his name? Oh jeez, Angus. I think King Angus. And that was, whenever you hear that story of that St. Patrick was baptizing the king, and he put the staff through his foot, and the king just stood there, like, he thought it was part of the ritual. But that was the King of Cashel. And anyways, you see, there was a problem then arose at this stage, like that the followers of Patrick that he had converted, they had gone out and started founding their own churches, like, around the place. And there was a bit of an argument, like, and they had to call the Synod of Cashel, which was kind of nearly the first major gathering of priests in Ireland for organizational purposes, and basically they divvied out who was in charge of certain areas. Like, it was between Patrick and 5 others basically, But that's whenever Emily, the bishopric, what I can't pronounce that word, Emily, the diocese, like, and the one that the Daisy were in charge of, and two others anyway. But they all divided out, like, what areas they were in charge of and all that kind of crack. And like Emily, it was one of the main dioceses in the country for a long, long time. It was one of the most ancient, like, and Cashel, where the Rock of Cashel is, like that only, it was about 200 years or about 150 years after Patrick's time that Emily and Cashel became part of the one kingdom, and the seat was moved to Cashel. I just find that a kind of an interesting one. But yeah, he went on then towards, like, Thomond. He went over towards, like, Limerick, and then down into, like, bits of Cork and all that kind of crack, like, and that's whenever you would have got the likes of Guggenbarra starting up as a monastery, probably one of the most beautiful ones in the world. But so at this stage now, there was very, very few wars in this country. There was basically King Leary, the High King, rowing about a tribute that Leinster and Munster, were paying between each other for 200 years, like. And everyone was pretty happy, like, at this stage, because a lot of this civil war that had broken out, 200-300 years beforehand was finally at an end. Like, Albie was the Saint and Emily. Oh yeah, that's the. I wasn't even going to guess the names. It's coming up in the chat. I love that. Thanks very much, John Tierney. But at this stage, everyone was pretty happy with how things were going, obviously, and the country had a kind of a new peace, that there wasn't petty squabbles all over the place, because we were all looking up to this higher power, instead of praying to trees and asking local druids what we should do about certain situations, like, relying on their wisdom and expertise, like, that was throwing us into disarray. And we were forgiven the old wounds that we had created on each other. So this was the point whenever King Leary, that he called a meeting, basically, between three kings, three bishops, and three Ollus, like poets, basically. And they started to sit down, and they wrote down they Christianized the rules of the Seanachus Mór, like, to kind of, sort it out a little bit, like. That's whenever you get the recording of, the Patrick or talking at the Hill of Tara and stuff like that. That's where this all came out of. But I'll just read out. I love this here, but it was Leary, Cork, and Derry the Hardy, Patrick, Bennin, Carnock the Just, Ross the Dovetalk, Fergus with science. These were the 9 pillars of the Seanachus Mór, Like, there's bits of the Seanachus Mór as poetry and stuff. Obviously, in Old Irish, it rhymes, like. But yeah, there was, in that, it's mentioned Ben Owen, and Ben Owen was the son of a really powerful fella in Meath. And he became, after Patrick resigned, first of all, I should say, Patrick worked as a missionary for 30 years, flat out, day in, day out in the country. And for the next 30 years, he basically oversaw what was going on to make sure everything was running smoothly. He became an organizer. And Ben Owen, he was appointed as the second Bishop of Armagh. So he was basically in charge of the, he was basically the primate of all Ireland, like. And after Ben Owen, there was Jarlath. And Jarlath, his father actually died a pagan, so Jarlath was ended up being from a pagan family, but being the Bishop of Armagh, like. And then Cormac, who was the nephew of King Leary, that Patrick had converted at the beginning, he became the 4th bishop, and Patrick appointed all of those 3 bishops to that job, and so the main places at that stage would have been Armagh. Obviously was the top dog, like. Then Elphin, Killala, Clogher, Down, and Connor were the main, 6 places that had been properly, fully established in the time of Patrick. But there was I was going to say there was 2 seconds. I wrote a note out 10 minutes ago, and then I forgot where I left it. Um, Sorry, silence is terrible. Radio silence. I had a sheet here. What was I writing? All right, I've lost it anyway. Anyways, there was. It's interesting. Like, you can look back through Irish history. Obviously, the monasteries and those dioceses that Patrick had established, they weren't dioceses in the sense of like the Roman Catholic Church, like we have today since like the 1200s, basically, like where you have fucking all these different dioceses anyway. But they were far more fluid than that. And it said in Patrick's time that he personally got permission and started building work on 300 chapels around the country, and that he ordained as many bishops, and then he what do you call it, consecrated, or what's the word, ordained, like 3,000 priests, like huge, massive numbers, like. And it's amazing like how well it suited the Irish mindset, and the way Patrick went about it. And it goes in. See, I was hoping to do another stream, a follow on to this, basically, because like this one and the last stream about Druidism, it's only kind of setting the stage for like a history, like, and I kind of like getting into the head of how things were at that time, because whenever I learned about history, it was kind of like, you're looking at a name and a date and then what they did, and it's kind of like there's no life behind it, if you get me. Like, but whenever you kind of get a bit of a base understanding of, well, what was happening at these times, like, you kind of get a bit more a bit more colourful, like, and you end up going down some rabbit hole about some bishop in wherever out in the west of Mayo back in like 680, and what happened there, and how this ended up, like his great grandson wound up being the king or something, and it's such an amazing history we have. But a lot of it's kind of like papered over, to kind of simplify it down for, especially even with the internet. Like, whenever you start Googling things, you get, like, Wikipedia is the worst invention that has ever been put on the face of this earth. Like, anytime you look up anything to do with Irish history, it's a load of fucking codswallop. Like even the Brehon or the Senecas Mór, the old Irish laws entry on Wikipedia, I have tried so many times to, like, I take a direct quote out of the book, I reference it, I change the article in the best English I can possibly muster, and then it gets rejected, and it's some liberal crap that I'm always trying to change. Like, it says, the death penalty was banned in Gaelic Ireland. It clearly was not. You could put people to death for just about anything if they pissed you off enough, like. But there's somehow, like, yourself, it's run by fucking communists. Like, they don't like history, communists. They need to rewrite it all the time. But, yeah, I'm just kind of ranting about communists now when I said I was going to talk about Patrick. But whenever he was rewriting the Senecas Mór, they went through, like, because of the way there was the, obviously the Civil War and stuff like that, he reorganized the whole way Gaelic tribes operated around each other. Like, there's a line in it, and it's Patrick brought order to where there was none, or whatever, But he basically created a hierarchy, like a strict hierarchy for the leaders of the country, that people could live happily, basically underneath their rule. And everywhere, like, it was such a stroke of genius that we lived for, what, 1,200 years under a lot of the time we were under fucking total warfare, and yet these laws managed to hold sway in the country until the what you call it, the Druids, or not the Druids, the I forget the word, the contention of the bards. I said there's a book, The Contention of the Bards. If you look that up, it's basically the bards of Ulster and the bards of Munster started arguing with each other about who should be the king of Ireland. And Wikipedia don't even get car specs right. Yeah, if I was St. Patrick, I'd declare Wikipedia to be the work of the devil, and to be shunned at every opportunity. But hopefully people just do it en masse anyway. They're always looking for money. Please donate €2. Like, you're not even worth €2. But like all these books, like this is the thing. Whenever it comes down to Gaelic history, and you're looking this stuff up online, everything like I like a vast majority of it that people have written in modern times about Irish history, and that you're reading articles and stuff like that, is absolute dung. Like, and they'll like they reach so far to try and pull whatever liberal meaning that they want out of these books. It's absolutely brutal. Like all these books, I might just put up. I don't know. I'll see if I can figure out how to, but I'll just link a load of books in the bottom where you can read Irish history till the cows come home. Like, so there's everything is there. All these experts, like, they're not. Like, it's terrible. Like all this was set up. Obviously, you had the monastic schools, and this will be the next stream that I'm talking about, the monastic way of education and how it worked, and the interactions between different monasteries and stuff like that, how the Gaelic system was working in the monastic way. But basically in the 1200s, it'll take a while, probably a couple of streams by the time I get up to that point, but in the 1200s you had this thing, the dissolution of the monasteries, which was whenever all the monasteries were ransacked, raided, shut down, because they were so powerful that they were challenging the rule of like English kings, that they couldn't subdue like really, really powerful bishops and, people that was coming out of these monasteries. So they had to shut them down. And after that, that's when we went from monasteries to universities. And our history, the Gaelic history, was rewritten by Oxford and Cambridge. There was a couple of bishops that were on the side of the King of England, and they rewrote our entire fucking history. Like that's whenever you start getting all these, what you call this, the Christianized creation myths and all this kind of stuff. That was the first time Noah, kind of started appearing in Irish texts. Like was after the dissolution of the monasteries. There's no mention of them like in 1100, before 1100, like in any text whatsoever. We had our own creation myth. It was Phineas Farside going back into, you can look in, or like, I suppose it's kind of a conspiracy theory before Phineas Farside, like, but you end up going back into like Aryan myths, like, or the Iranian and Mongolian creation myths, like, before that, like basically the Vedas. So like, even if you look at the Indian laws of Manu, very, very similar in places to the Shanachas Mór. Like as I said, the Shanachas Mór was only saved because people thought it was Sanskrit, because it was very similar style. These laws were written, and they were copied, one person looking at a book or whatever and wrote it out in the traditional way, like nearly like a kind of an Om script, If you look at Sanskrit, it's not far off it, like, it's just curly Om. But there's so much information online, and there's some great books. Obviously, there's a load of crap too that was written in like the 1800s and stuff like that. But you can get the source material now these days, like, and I would recommend anyone just open, even on the UCC Celt website, go into published texts and just start looking through the annals of the Four Masters, or any of that stuff, the Life of Patrick, or any of these books. Like, they're all fantastic. There's an Irish monk. I'll probably get onto him in the next stream, because I want to get talking about how, St. Bridget and St. Columkill and St. Finian and Moville and all these different fellas made such an impact on Irish history, like, and that even from the time of Patrick, you can see that a lot of our kings were Christian kings, like, and back in the chat earlier on, I think it was Maeve said that there was Christians in Ireland before St. Patrick got here, and that's why a lot of people looking back, they're like, there probably was a Christian influence on Conor McNassa, or Congo Bar, whatever you want to call him, or what is his name? Conor McNassa, but or Cormac McGarch, sorry, that there would have been a very kind of Christianized influence on him. And I think that's incredibly interesting. Like, and even then, if you go up into, like, say, the 8th and 9th century, there's a guy called Erigena, or Erigena, whatever you want to call him. But he was John the Scottish Irishman, was his name in Latin, translated back to English. But he was the fella, you know, like on the old £5 note, he was the guy on that note. And he was a philosopher. He was born in a place called Glenrua in Tipperary, and he was an absolute genius. Like, and I can't wait for the day, because it's only recently in the last couple of years now that people have actually, like, you know, academics have started looking into what he was saying, like, because he was declared a heretic in like the year 1100 or something like that. But you can read his stuff online. The Divisions in Nature is one of them, the Paraphysium, and it is well worth reading. It's like, he's called the final ancient philosopher. Like, you know, so if you think of like Plato and Aristotle, basically this guy, an Irish guy, born in the, you know, pretty much poverty in Tipperary in the 800s, he finished, he completed that line of thought, and it's amazing. Like, you know, he goes on about like the divisions of nature, that there's that which is not created and creates, that's God. That which is created and creates, that's thoughts, you know, like ideas like justice and all this kind of crack, you know, like capital J justice, not social justice. Then there's that which is created and does not create. So then you have the physical world, and then that which is not created and does not create, and that's the void, you know. But he manages to, like, it's a big thick book, like it's excellent. There's bound to be a PDF laying around there somewhere. I think I actually posted it on Twitter there a couple of days ago. But just download the PDF and just flick through it. It's like, it's unbelievable. Like, if you think Plato and Aristotle were good, this guy is head and shoulders above them, and never is he mentioned in this country. He was an Irish monk, like declared a heretic by Rome, but by Irish standards, he is like the pinnacle of Gaelic thought, you know. So I'd recommend that any Irish nationalist. Just, I know Stefan Molyneux got taken down off YouTube, but he probably has his big talk about Plato and Aristotle on BitChute somewhere. So I'd recommend anyone, if even if you're not bothered in philosophy, watch those 2 episodes of his. Then there's a guy called Pseudo Dionysius, the Divine Names, it's called. He was like an early convert to Christianity. If you read him, and I think Polonius or something is one other guy. I'll get the list anyways if anyone is interested in it. But there's only a few things you have to read. You know, like, watch 2 videos from Stefan Molyneux about Plato and Aristotle. Then there's like a couple of short books to read. And after that, you're basically on the level with Erigena, you know. You just read his book and try and wrap your head around it, because it was like, it's mind-blowing stuff. Like, I've just been ranting about Erigena now for the last 10 minutes, like, but, you know, like, that's as far as I'm concerned, that is peak Gaelic. Like, this is just before the Vikings landed and started shitting the place up. He come up with this stuff, like. But I'm going to try and in the next stream, I'm going to try and go to I see now, at this stage I'm about, what, 450 or 580, something like that. So in the next one, I'll probably get up to, I won't get up to Erigena in the next one, but I'll try and do it. I'll try and get up to Erigena, and then I'll do an episode on Erigena, you know, because it really is fantastic, and there isn't enough content about him on the internet at all yet. But yeah, we need to get to him before the academics wreck it, you know, basically. But yeah, so I started talking about Patrick, and then I started ranting about other stuff, but I kind of got the gist of it out of the way. And yeah, I was going to do like a pre-prepared video of this, but because it's Reek Sunday tomorrow, I was like, no, I'll just do a live stream about it, you know. Maybe the Erigena one, maybe a pre-prepared video. But I like this format better, tell you the truth. Like, and you know, we'll see what happens. Like, it could take a while to get a pre-prepared video done, but I like chatting about stuff. Yeah, John Scott is Erigena. Just Google that. Well, don't use Google. Use DuckDuckGo, PDF. Start reading it. Like, it's absolutely fantastic. You will not regret it. If he starts referencing Dionysius or whatever, Pseudo Dionysius or Polonius or any of these guys, like, you know, just, you know, the Wikipedia article will do for that. Like, but just Erigena, one of the best, if not the best, Irish minds to ever have existed. Like, you know, because after that, it's all kind of like, oh, he was an Englishman born in Ireland, you know, kind of, what you call him, John Boyle, Boolean algebra kind of crack, you know. But yeah, I suppose I'm at the hour mark. I ranted for like the last 20 minutes, but hopefully anyway, we'll get another stream done Tomorrow, I'm definitely busy going all the way down to. I'm looking at the map here at the minute, like, and I can't wait to go down. And I hope there's a good crowd is there, because I know I'd rather be in on Croagh than in Dublin City anyway. And yeah, hopefully whoever was in Dublin today, you know, I seen Antifa turned up and all that kind of crack, but these things happen. Anyways, yeah, hopefully I might see a few years in and around Croagh tomorrow, and I'll start thinking on the way up. I'll ask for some divine inspiration on where to begin the next stream, And I hope you all the best. And my coffee is getting cold, so I better head on. So, good night, everybody.